I am the famous American. Let's have a conversation. I made a video called People in Spain See Mexicans as Second-Rate Citizens. And I received a comment from Leonard Rangel. Here's this comment, quote, "If you're dark in any country, you will always be considered second class. Remember, people who were slaves of any country or field workers, you would work 10-hour days and your skin will eventually get darker than the elite who were indoors." End quote. So let's just unpack that in this short little video. So I almost feel like there's two points of this video. I think one in general is that there is obviously an understanding that in many countries, people with darker skin are automatically discriminated against for whatever pre-existing ideas they have about certain people. If you're darker, that you somehow have less value in society. There's that I think, especially in the United States, we're more familiar with. But this comment is focused on the fact that the people who were out in the fields were by default darker than the people who were rich. So is there truth in that? Now here's what I want to say. Being from Alabama in the United States, in the South, where slavery basically was the economy for so long, way too long. With that being said, in reality, in my home state of Alabama, here's really what it looked like. There were a lot of slaves from Africa working. There were a few very rich white men that owned those slaves. But what we often don't talk about are the other white people who were the majority who didn't own slaves because they were way too poor. And really the only thing that separated them from slaves was the fact they weren't of African descent, but they were still super dirt poor, and only a few certain white men actually basically ran the whole show. Even if you weren't a slave, you were still some kind of very dirt poor servant being white. So in that context, yes, by default the slaves would have the darkest skin being from Africa, but you had a lot of white people with tans, and they were darker than the white people. You know what this reminds me of? And I've made videos about this before, is the concept that traditionally, if someone was overweight, it was because they were rich. And if they were skinny, then it was because they were really poor and barely had enough to eat. But in modern day, and in any developed country, but especially in the United States where I am, it's the opposite, isn't it? What you see is, you see that the lower the income, the more likelihood you are to be obese, to be overweight. You don't have access to healthier foods. You have access to more junk food that's cheaper than processed food and that sort of thing. Meanwhile, if you have more money, and actually I was watching, there's called The Babylon Bee. It's like this satire, it's like a Christian satire about society. And it was talking about how now Whole Foods is going to offer out an official white privilege card to give out to its customers, insinuating that in order to be able to afford to shop at Whole Foods, you have to be white and rich. And I get the joke, and it's funny, and it makes sense. But it's going back to that concept that those with more money have access to better food, not the junk food, not the processed food. They have the ability to afford it, and they have often better education of, here is what's going to keep you from getting diabetes. So we've seen how that's reversed to where people who, it used to be, if you were poor, you were skinny. And if you were wealthy, then you might be the person that has the double chin and the big belly and all that, whatever that is that we think of. It's not that way anymore. Typically, the higher the income, what we see is, I'm not going to say the thinner the person, but more of a fit person compared to someone who is of lower income. So we've seen a reversal there. So I just think that's interesting how that all, to me, seems to kind of tie in with this concept of even how we could try to trace something back to people with darker skin having be some kind of second rate. And so basically, that's my version of an answer. All I am is a random guy behind a camera. What really matters is how you feel. What really matters is your reaction to what I just said. because you never know. That may lend itself to another video in the same way that this one was created. Your comments belong right here.